on Vigilant Liberty Radio.
And hour number 3 of Saturday Night Cigar Lounge here on Vigilant Liberty Radio. I'm your host, Taylor Millard. We have Lucy Steigerwald from antiwar.com, Peter Ream, Stefan Glaug, and George Templeton, all from freeradicalnetwork.com. And Stefan, I admit I am saying your name as much as possible, your full name as much as possible, to make sure that I don't call you Steven anymore.
Yes. Don't worry. I went to my high school graduation. The teacher sat there. They asked me my name, so I told it to them. And I've been nice all 4 years I went to school. And she said, Stephen Glaug. And I said, gosh, you got my... For everybody, you get one part or you get the other part right. Sometimes I won't even notice it. So I stopped on stage and said, look, woman, it's Stefan. And she changed it. And you had over like 1,800 people there when I did it, because I was like, gosh, just, it's not hard to do. Just once. That's all I ask.
If you want to talk about mispronounced names, my name obviously gets mispronounced a lot because people think that it's Millard, not Millard. But there was once, this was back in 95, I was getting tapped out for Order the Arrow in Boy Scouts. Yes, folks, I am an Eagle Scout. But I was getting tapped out for that, and they grabbed me. And for those who've never been in Order the Arrow, you have a big circle around a campfire, and they walk around and they grab the candidates for it. So they grab me, and I hear in the background, "Name. We need a name. What's his name?" And they go, and the people in my troop go, "It's Taylor Millard. It's Taylor Millard." And they go, "Tim Mueller, you are called to order."
Oh,
not even close.
Yeah, not even close. But thankfully, the cards said it right, so that was good. That was good. But there have been a couple of people who I have talked to when they get out of the military, and they aren't necessarily police officers, but they're looking at being police officers. And one of the things that they are talking about, that they say, is, we're trained in the military to treat everyone as a potential combatant. Everybody is possibly a bad guy. If you have a crowd of people over in Iraq, a crowd of demonstrators over in Iraq, you have to treat them, even if there's only one bad guy, you have to treat them all as bad guys. Let's start with Stefan. I'll start with you. Do you think that's something that, and then we'll go Stefan, George, Peter, Lucy. Do you think that's something that that is a problem that kind of comes into police force now, because you have all these military members coming in and they have the same mindset and they can't get out of that mindset?
It'd be hard for me to say, because for one thing, I'm not a cop. I can tell you that over my lifetime, I've been pulled over about 15 times. I've only had one bad experience, and that's when the cop pulled me in my yard. And I said, "Really? You're pulling me in my yard?" I said, "What are you pulling me for?" Because you're going 39 and a 40. I mean, you're going 39 and a 35. I said, "Are you fucking kidding me? You're pulling me for that? Are you that freaking stupid?" And I just kept on cussing at him. I said, "I'm in my yard, and you're writing me a ticket." So that's the only time I ever got that mad at a cop and tore it up in front of him and just walked in the house. What a jerk. Really, I'm in my yard, and it's for 4 miles. Do you have anything better to do? Yeah, it's just... But as far as the military thing, My mom, when she was married to the military, her second husband, I never really looked at the military as being bad. I've always been taught they look on the good of things. So I don't know how to explain it. I think that I would trust cops more on, or even military cops more on a level of that. If they've got orders to do certain things, they're going to follow those orders, and I have to rely on that trust. Now, that's just. Do I believe that 100% with every cop? No, but still, at the same time, I have to have that kind of faith, or else I'm going to distrust everything. And I think that's a bad thing to do if you can't trust the people who are supposed to protect you. Because you're not very far from anarchy if you're not.
Hey, anarchy's okay.
Oh, yeah.
I visited there. That town's pretty nice.
Yeah, not unless you want to go to, Ferguson and have marshmallows and hot dogs and stuff. There's plenty of places where they'll start a fire for you.
All right. Let's see. George, go ahead.
I think there's a lot of merit to what you say. I think the other thing is that there's the cultural decay has kind of led to it, because 15 years ago, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, I mean, I remember in school, there was always a policeman that would come in for some kind of school assembly to explain something to kids or whatever about any number of things. I can't even remember, it was so long ago. And I think that there was a time, and maybe it was before we found out how bad the police can be when they're bad, that in general there was a lot of trust of the police. There was a lot of respect for the police. There wasn't the sort of animus that there is now. So I think that as a result, the police, I'm not sure they were trained. I think they were trained more as community-minded officers and not much less as, hardcore law enforcement, that kind of thing. And I think now, especially because of the accusations of police brutality, some of which have been valid. Let's not forget that. And just especially the racial animus that has been ramped up between police and minorities. I think now they're always on the defensive. I think they're taught that way. I think they're trained that way to be very much, with a kind of a hard face up against whoever they're gonna be dealing with. And I don't think the notion, and again, it might be antiquated and it might be a product of. It might be that way in smaller towns where the police is sort of more like somebody somebody that's a part of your community, like a teacher is, like somebody you see a crossing guard is, or something like that. It may be different in smaller towns, but I think in general now police aren't orientated that way. They're orientated to just enforce the law, just deal with these people, and be on the lookout all times to protect yourself so something bad doesn't happen to you.
Peter?
It's interesting. He talked about small towns. I wanted to actually bring that up. So thank you for the segue, George. I actually grew up in a small town in Oregon. I always like to say that I didn't so much graduate high school as I was paroled. Oregon is a beautiful place, and there are some good people there, but I hated it with a deep, abiding passion, and I could not wait to leave. So as soon as I graduated, I was gone. And that said, there were some things that I learned, and one of them was I did a ride along with the local police department. As fate would have it, too, I had a paper route in the city, and one of the people on my route who got the paper was the police chief for the city, so he knew exactly who I was because I gave him his paper every day. That said, when we would do the ride-alongs, you do the drive around, but then he would stop, and it's a smaller town. It was about 7,000 people, but he would stop and he would walk on foot the whole of Main Street. And he would stop in on the businesses and say hello, including the local bar, and he would walk in and say hello to people, and he knew them by name and they knew him by name, and he would say, "Hey, how you doing, Bob?" etc. And there's a difference between policing that way and what we do in the bigger cities. Now, you have a place like Houston, which is massive, and it's a little more difficult to just walk into your local businesses and say hello and see how people are doing, because it's just, you don't have the police force to be able to do that. And I don't think that you should. So I think when you look at some of the larger towns, policing on that sort of scale really isn't possible. But I think that you can take the principles and apply them to a larger city and still do well and change that. So, but we don't sit and talk about that. We simply go, oh, well, it doesn't work in a big city. Well, nobody looks at what the principles are behind that and comes up with an idea to apply it to a bigger town. And so that, for me, is the frustrating thing. And you look at that and you say, well, if you're meeting people on that level, people suddenly aren't all criminals. They're just, people down there doing whatever. And when you know people and you know their behavior, you're not apt to see some guy who's kind of drunk and say, I'm going to bust this guy and he's going to go to jail. You say, listen, let me get you a ride home. I'll put you in the back of the car, and tomorrow we'll pick you up, and you can come down and get your car. It's no big deal. There's no crime. The guy doesn't go to jail. He doesn't do any drinking and driving. And quite frankly, it's probably the best use of police resources that you possibly could have, because the guy doesn't hit anybody. He doesn't wind up in a ditch dead, and you don't have any drinking and driving stuff, and you save yourself paperwork. Now, you can't do that on a larger scale, but you can do it in a lot of smaller cities, and I think that you ought to. So when people say, here's the cops, and they see everybody as a criminal, does that happen? Absolutely it happens. And it happens a lot in the bigger cities. It goes back to what I said at the very beginning. You have a police force that is following the laws that have been put into place. And politicians are creating laws, not all of them great, and dictating that policy to the police, and the police have to follow it, whether they like it or not. And pretty soon, everybody that they pull over, they see as a criminal, because that's most of who they deal with. So when you have this type of mindset, it's not because that's what you're trained to do. It's because that's everybody that you have to deal with, because you're literally racing from one call to the next, and the majority of the people that you deal with are criminals. But when you're stepping into, a bar, and you're just seeing how things are going, and you're talking to the bartender, and you know them by name, that takes that whole attitude away. The question is, and I don't think we can answer tonight. If we can, great, but how do you translate that small town feel where you get to know people by name and you get to know them by who they are to bigger towns? Because I think that it's important to do, and I think that is what would change the dynamic, where you have the police being what they should be. And that is that we used to call them peace officers. Now we call them police officers. Imagine just the subtle difference that it makes where it's a peace officer rather than a police officer. I'm not suggesting we get into that whole, we should use the right language thing. I'm not for that at all. I just think that there's a difference between it, and it connects psychologically. So there you go.
Go ahead, Lucy.
Okay, so can you, Taylor, remind me, the way you phrased this question kind of puzzled me initially, because you were saying that military people are actually joining the police force, and that's translating into a militarized mindset?
Well, it could. I don't know if it does. I just know that I've had military people who I've talked to have said that they have that mindset. And it's not every single person, but... Well,
it reminds me of... I've spoken to Radley Balco, who's, Mr. Police Reform guy in the nation, basically. And he's referenced other sources that have said this, where you've had actual military people who have former cops, over in Iraq or Afghanistan or wherever, and the cops are the ones who are kind of playing cowboy and are kind of out of control and looking for an adrenaline rush. And then I've had Radley has referred to other people who basically said